All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited today to have with me my friend and mentor, my former boss. He's the president of the Leadership Institute, Morton Blackwell. Morton, welcome back to the news.
Hi, Matt. Nice to be with you today.
Great to see you. And I've told you this before, but Morton, you and the Leadership Institute really changed my life. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if it wasn't for you believing in me, and then the internship that I did at the Leadership Institute. Just can't say enough good things about the what you've done in the organization.
Well, I'm happy that we've helped you. The Leadership Institute has now trained, in the little over 40 years since I founded it, a little more than 225,000 people.
Wow. So I got a lot of, there's a lot of Matt Lewis's out there. I know a lot of.
I don't know anywhere near all of them as well as I know you and your fine family. Always happy to deal with you.
Well, thank you so much for all you do. And I wanted to today, and I have with me a copy of it's a framed copy of the Laws of the Public Policy Process that I think every student gets. It could be digital, but in some form, every graduate gets it. I'd love to know, but I want to ask, I'm going to go through these and have you talk a little bit about them. But first, when did you come up with the idea to put down these maxims and to collect them?
Well, I started getting seriously interested in politics back in 1958. In October, a columnist in Newsweek, then a conservative magazine, named Raymond Mobley, interesting man with an interesting history, but I had come to hold him in high regard, and he said that the most important election in the country in that 1958 off-presidential year midterm elections was the effort of the labor unions to defeat a freshman United States Senator from Arizona named Barry Goldwater, who was running for re-election. And that's the first time I can recall having my attention focused on him. And by 1960, he had published The Conscience of a Conservative, a powerful book that is still in print, still has a great impact on lots of people. And at the 1960 convention, Nixon was the vice president. He had the election nomination sewed up, but nevertheless, there were a lot of delegates who had been elected in various states supporting Goldwater for president. And Goldwater made a wonderful talk saying, conservatives, grow up, our time will come, let's get together and elect Nixon. Well, I had never been a particularly big fan of Nixon, but that's what Goldwater said. So I got together a few of my friends at Louisiana State University, and we formed a group, Students for Nixon and Lodge. We weren't prepared yet to call ourselves Republicans, but we organized that and didn't know much of what we were doing, but did some work in the fall campaign of 1960. And in 1961, with my future wife, Helen, we formed a conservative student club at LSU, which in the second semester, we chartered with National Young Americans for Freedom in 1962. We formed a college Republican club at LSU. And as I was involved more and more in various youth activities and campaign activities, I began to see that there were mistakes that were commonly made by perfectly good-willed people who couldn't figure out what the right course of action was and would learn the lessons the hard way by trial and error. And so I started collecting and in some cases phrasing maxims, which I collected, and I had a dozen of them, and then I had 25 of them, and I began to call them the laws of the public policy process and printed it up, and then I added some more, and it was 32 laws of the public policy process, and finally I added some more, and I've settled on 45 laws of the public policy process, which we distribute to our students.
Yes.
Leadership Institute has a number of foreign interns every year, and my foreign interns have done me the great honor of translating these rules into their home languages, and so we have and publish online at the Leadership Institute these laws in 16 different languages currently.
Oh, wow. I think when I interned, there were 2 Chileans and a Canadian, so every semester. And then, of course, we know Alex Pisset from France, who interned while I was working at LI.
Oh, what a fine fellow he is. Alex had the good sense to marry a beautiful young lady in my development department and went back to France and started an organization there analogous to the Leadership Institute. It's called Institut de Formation Politique, and it's now been going for something like 15 years and has great success. They own their building. They do political education and training of young conservatives in France. And I'm real proud of what they have achieved.
It's great. Well, let's go through some of these. I don't know, some of them maybe we can just mention, and some of them I want you to expound on. But let's start with the first one. Never give a bureaucrat a chance to say no. This one reminds me a little bit of the maxim that it's better to obtain forgiveness than permission. Is it similar?
Well, I guess you'd have to say that they are related, but the problem is if you have bureaucrats who are imposing rules on people, it's going to be very often replete with abuses of power, mistakes in judgment, and you don't have the liberty to do what you think is the right thing to do. And that one's not original with me, but I loved it the moment I heard it, and it's still very popular. People in discussions will throw that in, quoting me. It's not mine, but I'm happy to add my list.
I don't think of it from and maybe this is my interpretation, I don't think of this maxim as being like a macro statement about the bureaucracy. I see it as very personal. Like, if I'm going to go to a college and hand out flyers, I'm not going to check in and ask them if it's okay for me to do that. I'm going to do it. And then if they tell me you can't do it, well, then we maybe have a discussion. Is that what you had in mind, or is it different?
Well, yeah, that is certainly true in political activities. If you ask for permission to a political authority or to a campus authority, the chances are very good that they're going to not let you do what you want to do. If you're doing a recruitment on college campuses, which I have done a great deal in my life, off and on for 5.5 years, I was executive director of the National College Republicans, 1965 to 70, and as part of that, I did recruitment on college campuses, set up a table in an area of maximum foot traffic, and very often people told me, after I'd been there for a few hours and signed up a lot of people, no, you can't do this. I would say, sorry, I don't know. Didn't know that. At Louisiana State University, we would have a campaign project in the fall where we would hand out 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, which had the officials' signals that the officials would give as they were officiating at the games. And we would hand it out to people, and most people haven't memorized all of those things. They would be happy to receive it, and we would have a bunch of campaign material, photographs of our candidate, issues favorable to the candidate, etc. And first time we did it, I was called into the office of the Dean of Men, Dean Arden O. French, who told me that this was terrible, that we were distributing these at the football games, people were receiving them, and that hurt the sales of the official programs, and it was wrong. And and I said, well, it's not in the rules anywhere, it's not in the book, and I won't do that again. But meanwhile, we have sent out thousands of these flyers into the hands of people who took them into the seats during the game, and having nothing better to do during the game, they read all of the political information.
Well, I like it. Number 2, don't fire all of your ammunition. Don't fire all of your ammunition at once.
Let me just give you the sequel.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry.
The next 3 years, I stayed out of the distribution. Allies of mine passed those things out. They got called into the office of the Dean of Men. They said, well, it's not written down anywhere, and I promise I won't do it again. That happened at least 3 years in a row. Go ahead.
Oh, all right. Number 2 is don't fire all your ammunition at once. I mean, I think there's a tendency, sort of like if you're in a legal dispute or something, to just like have overwhelming force, put forward all of your evidence and walk away. But that's a mistake, isn't it?
Yeah, that's mistaking the dynamics of activity in a court of law and the dynamics of activity in an election. In a court of law, you've got 2 lawyers, whether it's a civil case or a criminal case, and each one of them has an opportunity to make the points that are strongest on their side. The decision is made of which side wins is made either by a jury or by a judge, and generally the legal system produces a good result. But the reason for that is that the jury and the judge are all sworn to pay close attention to everything that is presented, and they are pledged to use their very best judgment after careful study. In an election, when you go register to vote, you don't have to take an oath to swear that you're going to study every candidate and make the decision as to who is best qualified to fill this office. In an election environment, you are marketing your candidate into an electorate, many of whom are not interested particularly in that campaign or your candidate, and you've got to figure out ways to get your campaign issues and your candidate favorably impressing that electorate out there sufficiently that they will go to vote, or if they go to vote, they will vote for your candidate. And it's a terrible mistake in an election campaign if you have some really good negative information about your opponent to lay it all out at once. No, right. You lay out enough to get yourself a round of earned news media and no more. And then you get that round of earned news media, and then you release more information. Again,
your story about cutting the puppy dog's tail off one snip at a time.
Well, you want me to tell that?
Yeah, you might as well. It's a good one.
Everybody knows that for certain breeds of dogs, it's standard for the breed to cut their tails short when they are a day or two old. They do it for poodles. they do it for bots, there's several breeds. That's standard. I understand there are laws in some states like California. It's against the law to cut the puppy's tail, but I'll bet you walk around California, you'll see a lot of dogs with their tails cut short. Well, as far as I know, people who have the responsibility of cutting it off a puppy's tail, because it's standard for the breed, snip it once. They could cut that puppy's tail 6 times to get it to the right length, but they don't do that. And the reason they don't do that is that it hurts every time. And so the maxim translates into politics. If it's your tail getting cut, you want it cut once and cleanly. If you've got an opportunity to clip your opponent's tail, clip that tail as many times as you can.
That's a good one. That's a good one. And then the potential also is that you draw them off sides, right? So if you say you say my opponent's tearing down yard signs, but you don't say I have proof. I have the picture. You just say he's tearing down yard signs.
Well, that's a different. Yeah. That's a different principle.
Is that on the list too? Well, am I going to get to it?
No, it's called the draw play. In football, the draw play is where the team that has the ball and wants to go on and score a touchdown starts off a play in such a way which misleads the defense. So the defense are drawn off of where they ought to be, and the team on offense runs through the hole. That's what a draw play is in football. Applied to politics, in a draw play, when you have absolutely solid proof, irrefutable proof that anybody will agree is absolutely 100% verified. Sometimes it's possible, and I've only seen this happen a handful of times now in decades and decades of politics. Sometimes you can make the charge about this negative information, but not reveal to the news media or to your opponent the solid nature of your proof. And you make the charge to the media. They say, well, what's your proof? And your supporter can say, I saw it with my own eyes. But that's not necessarily proof, because that's one of your people. And so sometimes your opponent, knowing full well that what you said was true, will deny it, and deny it to the news media. And when they deny it to the news media, then you produce the solid gold 24-karat proof that you had all along. And that is really damaging, because the news media will make a politician pay if that politician gets caught in a lie to them.
But that's why I think it's related to don't fire all your ammunition at once, because if you say we saw him, he's going to assume if they had video, they would release it. But anyway, that's a great one.
I agree, but the draw play is a special case where your opponent actually lies. The no fire all your ammunition at once doesn't necessarily involve the opponent not telling the truth. What it does, it enables you to keep an issue that's important to you and your campaign in front of the people by bringing up new information that relates to it, and it becomes more widely known and can become significant in an election campaign.
All right. To try to get through these, I'm going to explain a couple of them. Tell me if I'm wrong, and if not, I'll just keep going. Number 3 is don't get mad except on purpose. My take on that is simply it's fine to feign outrage, but if you actually get mad, you stop thinking rationally and you make mistakes. So keep your cool. Number 4 is effort is admirable, achievement is valuable. I think that's self-explanatory, but profound. 5, here's one I don't understand. Make the steel more expensive than it's worth. What is that?
Well, not everybody who participates in politics is an honorable person. And many times there are people who take steps in politics that are grossly unfair. Let's say you're getting ready to go into a convention and your opposition cheats very badly, sends in the delegates who didn't register properly, who weren't qualified to participate, and then the opposition within the organization has complete control over the credentialing process, and they can discredit your legitimate delegates and run in extra delegates. Well, it might be possible for you to take the evidence of what they have done and go at a higher level. If this is a local political contest, you could go to a congressional district party chairman or to a state party chairman or to some highly respected elected official who's part of your party and show them what has happened and say, can you tolerate having this fraudulent, dishonest thing be done? And so now if they go through with the steal, they take on the reprobation of people elsewhere, the general public, leaders within the structure. So sometimes, even though the opposition has the power to steal, you can stop them from doing it by figuring out a way that the steal would result in very bad damage for them, and then they don't take the steal.
So even if they get away with it, they wish they hadn't. It's like a Pyrrhic victory or something. Let's see. Number 6, give them a title, get them involved. So that's if you're like on a campaign. If someone's a volunteer, like make them the East Street coordinator, or something that sounds prestigious. It costs you nothing, and it will give them ownership over a project. That is a great tip. Expand the leadership. I think that means instead of hoarding all of the power, whereas if you got hit by a bus, nothing could happen. If you start to bring in other leaders, instead of being selfishly guarding it, you'll have a more powerful organization.
Well, if you believe in advancing a certain set of principles, you have, I believe, a moral obligation to see what you can do to keep those principles being well supported. And that requires that you look around you and see other people who have leadership potential and give them responsibility. It's not just a matter of giving them a title to get involved, which is a worthy thing to do, but here you give them real responsibility and let them show their commitment to principles by their doing hard work in behalf of the principles that you share. And in my view, ultimately in any political contest, the winner is determined by who has the greatest number of effective activists and leaders. And so if you want your side to win, you need to dramatically increase the number of activists and leaders on your side, and that means expand the leadership.
Amen. I love it. And that's what you've spent a lot of your life doing. Number 8, you can't beat a plan with no plan, so have a plan. Number 9, political technology determines political success. By political technology, it's the ability to organize. How do you define political technology?
You could define it as skills generally speaking, political technology is philosophically neutral skills. A lot of people get in politics and they're persuaded that their side is right, and yet they think they can prove that they're right, and yet the other side beats them. And when I came upon this understanding in the early 70s, it was a revelation to me, because by then I knew very well how evil the communists were, and how many people they had murdered, and how many people they had looted, and the whole rotten totalitarian system. And yet I knew that the communist promises historically are all lies. They don't enrich people. They impoverish societies, etc. But I knew conservatives and anti-communists were right, and yet we were losing battles all throughout my youth and into middle age, for sure. The communists were taking over country after country every year or so. And I knew that what they were doing was a lie, and I knew that my side was right, but yet we lost. Why could that be? Well, the answer is being right in the sense of being correct is not sufficient to win, and you owe it to your philosophy to study how to win. If you allow your opposition to learn how to organize and communicate, and raise funds and organize precincts and give good speeches, whatever, if their skills are superior to yours, then they can beat you no matter how right you are.
So political technology determines political success, not virtue or being morally right. It's the ability to organize and communicate, and therefore you owe it to your philosophy to study how to win, learn to be a better writer, learn to be a better talker, all that.
That's right. That's right. I mean, in many ways, that's what the Leadership Institute does. We find people who are reasonably sound conservatives, and we teach them the skills and techniques of how to succeed, how to organize, how to raise funds. It's a how-to thing, and most political technology is philosophically neutral. Now, the communists use terror as a political technique, and that certainly is not philosophically neutral. But how you design a piece of literature so that people can read it and be persuaded by it, that works as well for a conservative as it does for an Antifa member.
Yes. And by the way, July 31st, I will be helping lead a Zoom class for the Leadership Institute on how to be a pundit. And we'll be teaching people, we'll be teaching people things like how do you, if you want to write a column, how do you pitch an editor? And I'm going to be talking to editors and freelancers, and the techniques work for anybody, but we want conservatives.
You're giving people the advantage of the lessons that you have learned, many of which were not taught by me or any other conservative, many of which you paid the price to learn in the School of Hard Knocks. And School of Hard Knocks teaches its lessons well, but you may not live long enough to graduate from the School of Hard Knocks.
So if you want to take that class, anybody who's watching or listening, leadershipinstitute.org. It's called How to Be a Pundit, and it's July 31st, which I think is a Friday.
And it's online.
Yes, we're doing it via Zoom, right? So you don't have to physically be there. You could be anywhere in the world and watch this.
And we'll promote it, and I'll bet you'll have a fairly sizable audience outside the boundaries of our country. That's one advantage of Zoom. You don't have to get there and all be in the same room. Exactly.
Well, I am looking forward. All right, let's see. We are on number 8. I think I skipped. No, we're on number 10. Sound doctrine is sound politics. What's that?
That's a quote. from one of the smartest Democrat politicians in our whole country. And I read the stuff that he wrote. He was the campaign manager for Franklin Roosevelt.
Is this James Farley?
James A. Farley. And he was arguing to liberal Democrats that sound doctrine is sound politics, suggesting to them that if they stick to their principles, they will benefit in the long run. And if they switch around and change when the wind changes direction, that they're not likely to achieve as much in the long run. But if you stick to your principles, others who share those principles will stick to you. So but that's a direct quote from James A. Farley, who, by the way, opposed Franklin Roosevelt's third term election.
Yeah, wasn't Farley a fairly conservative Democrat?
He was indeed. Simultaneously, Farley was, by Roosevelt, made chairman of the Democratic National Committee. He was state chairman of the Democratic Party of New York, and he was Postmaster General of the United States, all at the same time.
Now, I think this one's related. Number 11, I think, is related to that. It's in politics, you have your word and your friends. Go back on either, and you're dead. So this is about. I mean, I would say on one hand, this is about decency and honor, but on the other hand, I think there is a danger when you put loyalty to people and not principle, and some people maybe could interpret it that way.
Well, no, it is extraordinarily important for people to learn to discern between the two types of loyalty to principle and loyalty to people who have the power to advance you in life or society. You can learn some bitter lessons where people that were very close to you had confidence in, you gave them authority and responsibility, but as soon as they were in a position of authority where you were no longer essential to them, they could betray you in a minute. Well, people who are in politics should be on the lookout for folks whose loyalty is only to the source of future advancement for them. I would far prefer trusting somebody who had knowingly gone down to defeat fighting for a cause that he thought was right, rather than take the opportunity to switch to be on the winning side. And it is beneficial. There are a lot of people who were very strong politically, but who were held in high regard by their opponents because their opponents knew that their word was good. I take the example of Senator Jesse Helms, who was in the Senate for many terms, extraordinarily hardcore, and in the Senate, an individual member can make things happen, even more so when Helms was there. And if a senator was in negotiation with Senator Helms on a particular point, they knew that if Helms agreed and nodded his head in agreement, you could absolutely rely on Helms to deliver what he said he would do. And there are other people that you could get to sign a notarized document, and you still would have serious question as to whether or not the person would deliver his promise. And so that wound up, Senator Helms was one of the most powerful members of the Senate. Everybody knew his word was good.
Number 12, keep your eye on the main chance and don't stop to kick every barking dog. Great advice. If you're on a campaign and you're going door to door, don't stop and get in an argument with some one person, because you could have knocked on 100 doors during the time you're having that argument. 13, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. I think it's great advice. You know, sometimes if you get 80% of what you want, consider that a victory, right? That's,
Well, perfection isn't part of our human capability. Perfection is something we should move toward. You can have a compass that points true north, and you can use that compass for a guide all your life, even though you don't have any reasonable expectation that you're ever going to get to the North Pole.
mm-hmm. Here's a good one, number 14 of the laws of the public policy process. Remember, the other side has troubles too. This is really important in terms of keeping your attitude positive, right? You could start to think that your opponents, that they're always perfect, and the truth is that they're dealing with issues, challenges as well.
That's right. That's right. If people have emotions, and if things start going poorly for you, you may get persuaded that it's just hopeless. But if you keep fighting, you may be pleasantly surprised with the ultimate result.
It's good advice if you're playing baseball or something. Whatever you're doing, the other side has troubles too. 15, don't treat the good guys like you treat the bad guys. What does that mean?
Well, one of the observations that I had early on as we began to build a conservative movement back in the 1960s was that conservatives who somehow got into trouble, sometimes by their own fault, sometimes by a course of events they could not have prevented, the morale of that is a very, very important thing. I should have turned this thing off. Where were we?
You're talking about the morale of a conservative who gets caught up in something.
Well, a number of these have to do with keeping your spirits up. A number of these maxims, because you can get despondent and give up.
Yeah. So this one's don't treat the good guys like you treat the bad guys.
Don't treat the good guys like you treat the bad guys. You need to do special things to help people who are on your side that you wouldn't go out of your way to do for people on the other side. The people on your side have a claim to your loyalty up to reasonable limits, and you should work what you can to build up those people who are loyally doing the best they can working on your side.
Right.
And you will do things for them that you wouldn't go out of your way to do for somebody who is a political foe.
And that leads to number 16, a well-run movement takes care of its own, which I think is
same idea.
Yeah, very same. But it's important to say, I don't hear a lot of people going around saying it other than you. Here's one I think is really interesting. Number 17, hire as many to the right of you as the left of you. And I think what happens is there's some psychological thing where however conservative you are, but we humans, for some reason, tend to assume anybody to the right of us is insane. And so what we do is, like, let's say I'm a level 8 conservative, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm an 8. I start hiring people, I hire a 7 and a 6 and a 5. And the next thing you know, my office is an average 6 level conservative. And everyone I'm around is influencing me over time, and they're making decisions too. Whereas if I hired some people more conservative than me, that would keep me balanced. Is that how you see it?
If your idea, if you persuade yourself, I am as conservative as you can get and still be responsible. Anybody who is to any degree to the left of me is to that extent irresponsible. This happens with considerable and disappointing frequency when good conservatives get elected to the Congress. And they figure that they don't want to have anybody who's slightly more conservative because it might be embarrassing and they'd be attacked. So they are willing to hire people who are more left-wing than they are. And when that happens, the whole office, the elected official who was elected to achieve certain things that he wanted to achieve, finds that he's being tugged off to the left. And so you shouldn't describe yourself as conservative as you can be without being irresponsible. There are people who disagree with you and a little more conservative who aren't necessarily going to be counterproductive. In fact, they could be very helpful to you if they have the right talents.
Yeah, and I can just say, like, as a writer, if the only people I hang out with are to my left, eventually that would impact my worldview. And so luckily I'm married to someone who's to my right. So,
Well,
but she's also to the right of Attila the Hun.
You may be right about that, Aaron. Maybe to your right. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Erin, I don't know if you know this, Morton. So Erin, my wife Erin, her mom was the volunteer head of the West Virginia Eagle Forum. And when my wife was like 14.
Like my wife, 25 years, head of Virginia Eagle Forum. Yeah.
So she's hardcore. You know, Erin, let's see. Here's one, 18. You can't save the world if you can't pay the rent.
Right.
And obviously, being movement oriented and caring about politics is important. But if you go bankrupt and if you become homeless, there's not a lot of good you can do in politics, right?
Right. I mean, you can't expect everybody to provide you the resources that you need to achieve what you want to achieve, just because they happen to agree with you. You've got to gather the resources that are necessary to make things happen. To achieve anything takes some combination of time, talent, and money. And a lot of people are embittered. People come in, this happens to me with some frequency. People will come in and tell me that I have a plan, and if we can adopt this plan, that is going to solve almost all the problems of our country. We just have to do this one thing. And you look at it, and what it amounts to, everybody else has to stop what they're doing and go to work into the concept that this person wants. And it's not practical. People are not going to drop everything they're doing and work just on that particular bright, shiny object.
But everyone thinks they're going to come in, they're going to convince you, the secret is we're going to buy NBC. And like, if we could just do that.
Well, there's some things that may seem impossible that may be worth trying. Many years ago, and you probably don't remember this, the great and admired Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina was so upset with the media that he did a calculation and found that of the three major networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC, the one that had the smallest capitalization was CBS. And so he went out to conservatives in a public-spirited way and said, we should all go out and buy stock in CBS, and then we'll own it. And we can deal with Walter Cronkite and other folks. And a lot of conservatives did. But it turns out that not enough people put in the money. However, in the process of doing this, I bought some CBS stock. I knew a major donor in Central Virginia who, with her husband, invested $250,000 in CBS stock. And after the better part of a year, Senator Helms realized we weren't going to do it, and he said, "Okay, we tried. It was a good effort. Not enough people came." Everybody who had bought CBS stock profited greatly. The stocks were worth about twice, and they sold them. So that worked out okay.
It worked out. Okay, Morton, we've been talking for 45 minutes. We're not halfway done yet. Do we plow through, or do I talk to Kathy and try to do a part 2 of this in a month or two? How's your schedule right now?
I can go for, my schedule requires something in an hour and 5 minutes. So
I think we can do it. I think we can do it if we
give it a try.
All right. All gains are incremental. Some increments aren't gains. What does that mean?
Well, it combines two facts. People think that a particular victory is going to change everything to the better forever, and it's not. That's not the way that it works. And most major important things happen as the result of many different little incremental points. If you're building a movement, you've got to have people who know how to raise money. You've got to know people who know how to write well, people who know how to speak well, people who have a reputation of high character, people who are skilled in the online things that are necessary, and you could go on ad infinitum with things that can contribute towards the success of an overall project. And just taking one element of that by itself isn't going to do it. It's an increment in the right direction. And then the second part, not all increments are gains. You can take a step that you think is going to be a wise and prudent step that's going to advance the cause, and you may not have given sufficient thought to the negative impact of what you're doing, and you could then wind up in worse position after you've achieved that increment that you were fighting to do.
Number 20 is a stable movement requires a healthy reciprocal IOU flow among its participants. Don't keep a careful tally. I think that's good. 21, an ounce of loyalty is worth a pound of cleverness. Good maxim. 22, never miss a political meeting if you think there's the slightest chance you'll wish you'd been there.
You know who I got that from?
No.
George Herbert Walker Bush.
Oh.
I don't often quote him, but one of the penetrating things that he said phrased a different way, that a very large proportion of success is obtained just by being there.
Yeah.
Not every skill of how to participate successfully in the public policy process is taught. There are schools on how to raise money and how to organize a precinct and how to do a podcast. They're schools, and that's wonderful. But there are some areas of expertise that there aren't any schools. One of them is meeting dynamics. You can study parliamentary procedure and know all the rules, but that doesn't mean that you are going to be a power to be reckoned with at some meeting or convention if you don't understand meeting dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
far as I know, nobody's ever had a school about how do you win a meeting or a convention. It may be counterintuitive. If you're the whiz on parliamentary procedure and you're in the meeting, it isn't smart for you to correct every little error that the chair does, because people are going to view that negatively. They're going to view you as a narrow-minded nitpicker, and you have to sometimes let your opponents do things that are contrary to parliamentary procedure, as long as it's not going to fundamentally damage your position. Just let them make those mistakes, and you don't have to tell them that under Robert's rules a nomination doesn't require a second. If the chairman says, "Is there a second?" and somebody says "I second the nomination," you can say it, and you may be right, but you've hurt yourself by doing it. So I believe that in order to win at meetings or conventions, you've got to go to a whole lot of them. And
Yeah. And Woody Allen said 80%.
Not many more people in America who have been to many more Republican meetings than I have, my friend.
Woody Allen said 80% of life is just showing up, and I think there's a lot of truth in it. You know, if you just show up at your job every day, if you actually just come in, you could be pretty incompetent. You probably won't get fired if you just show up every day. It's a good rule. In volunteer politics, a builder can build faster than a destroyer can destroy. Now, in the real world, this doesn't ring true to me. I mean, an arsonist can burn down a building instantly or within an hour or two, whereas it might have taken months or years to build that building. Why is it that in volunteer politics, a builder can build faster?
Volunteer politics, in order to benefit your side, you go out and recruit additional people on your side. If your opposition tries to take one of those people whom you have recruited and brought in and persuade that person that you are no damn good, it's probably going to be somewhat difficult, because this person was recruited by you and has a high regard for you. And it's going to be difficult to do. And by the time one of your opponents converts one of your allies, you've been able to go out and organize and recruit several new people. Gotcha. So you will, in volunteer politics, I believe this to be true.
Number 24 is actions have consequences, and I assume that this is what the kids call a subtweet of the idea that ideas. You're saying actions have consequences. The famous book is Ideas Have Consequences.
Right. Well, this is a big thing with me. I've mentioned that what I do is look for people who are reasonably conservative and teach them how to be effective in government politics and the news media. That's what I've been doing in the main in my lifetime of political activity. But that presents a problem, because many people are deeply committed philosophically, and they have read complex books with fat paragraphs and long words in it, and have absorbed the meaning of these things. They know, by golly, that they are right. And they very frequently believe that being right in the sense of being correct is sufficient. All you got to do is prove that you're right, and somehow victory will fall into your deserving hands like a ripe fruit off a tree. But that's not the way the real world works. And so what I've been doing now for some generations is find people who are sound philosophically, teach them that the real nature of politics is that the winner is the side that accumulates the greatest number of effective activists. tell them the side that creates the greater number of effective activists is the side that uses the right skills of how to organize and communicate. And if all of that is true, then you, Mr. Philosophically Committed Conservative, you have a moral obligation to study how to win. And if you don't study how to win, and the opposition does study how to win, they're going to beat you no matter how right you are. And by no means have I been successful to persuade every intellectual conservative that he or she needs to study philosophically neutral skills, because many people have a tenacious hold on the idea that mere technique is beneath their dignity, because we're thinking about the higher things. But if you want to win in the public policy process for your principles, you have a moral obligation to study how to win. So that's why a number of these maxims touch on various aspects of that.
You know, it's funny because now, someone who writes about ideas in politics, I'm not an activist in the sense that I'm not like out knocking on doors, campaigning for anybody. But if I want people to read my stuff, I still have to be in the promotions business. I have to, email my stories out, develop relationships with other people who are going to share my stories. I have to accumulate a large Twitter following that I can then tweet my columns out to. So, it's not exactly analogous to what you're talking about, but if I were just having ideas or writing about them, it's like if a tree falls in the woods, but nobody's there, does it make a sound?
Well, I read a newspaper column today in the Washington Times by my old friend Cal Thomas. I knew him years ago when he worked with Jerry Falwell in Falwell's earlier years. There was a long time, and for all I know, it is still the case, when Cal Thomas's column appeared in more different newspapers in the country than any other columnist. Now, did that mean that all these newspaper editors beat a path to his door to get him to let them publish? No. Cal Thomas went around, devoted time, talent, and money, and visited hundreds of newspapers and talked with the editors and persuaded them that he would write a good column, and he did write a good column, and he maintained it. But it was not just the merit of his thinking and the skill of his English, but he actually went and established a personal relationship with the decision makers that decided that they had the power to publish his column.
And he could have thought, that's beneath me. I'm a brilliant writer. They don't need, I shouldn't have to go and hold my hat and kiss babies or whatever. But it was smart to do what he did, and it worked for him.
Yep.
All right. Number 25, the mind can absorb no more than the seat can endure. I think that one's obvious, like at the Leadership Institute, if you could be, teaching brilliant things, but if students are sitting there for 3 or 4 hours and you haven't given them a bathroom break or a Diet Coke, they're going to quit learning at some point. 26 is personnel as policy. I think we touched on this one earlier. The people you hire are going to be making decisions when you empower them, and they're going to be influencing you. And so it's important to hire the right people because they will be policy.
That is one of the several of these maxims that was put together by me. In 1972, Richard Biggery hired me away from the American Enterprise Institute. He said, help me build a conservative movement. Richard began to fund, and I helped him organize gatherings that we've met multiple times a week with people who were philosophically sound and try to figure out how we could start winning more as conservatives in the public policy process. And I came up with with that. Personnel is policy. Ed Fulner was there in the room, and he attributes that to me, as does Richard Viguerie. There have been variations of that. People sometimes say people are policy, but the concept of personnel is policy, meaning those that you hire affect what your policy is. And I faced that in late 1980 and early 1981. I was in the personnel office of President-elect Ronald Reagan, and we're hiring people. And it was not enough for us to see that a particular job seeker had skills that were appropriate to the job that that person wanted, or that some other people wanted that person to get. It was extraordinarily important that as many people as we could who were hired into the Reagan administration actually shared the president's principles, had a personal commitment to limited government and free enterprise and strong defense and traditional values. Reagan actually had little cards printed up and gave to personnel department heads during the transition with the list of the qualifications that he was looking for. And it was very clear that he wanted people who would be enthusiastic and competent in advancing his principles.
I miss him. I never met him, but I miss him. And my wife and I took our kids to Great Capon State Park in West Virginia a couple of weeks ago, like on D-Day, and we listened to the entire "These Are the Boys," you know, his entire the Peggy Noonan, I guess, speech. Man, so good, so good. Remember, it's a long ball game. I think that one's obvious. You know, maybe you're getting beat in the second inning, but you don't quit because you got 9 innings to play. 28, the test of moral ideas is moral results. I think what this means is, so like communism maybe sounds like a moral idea, equality or what, but it never works out, right? It ends up with people being murdered and authoritarian regimes. Is that what you had in mind with this one?
You got it.
I got it, okay. You can't beat somebody with nobody. What's that?
It's not enough to simply, when you're trying to fill up.
Because I think Joe Biden and the Democrats are trying to test that theory.
Yeah. Well, there's a limit to how much he cannot campaign.
But I'm sorry, I interrupted. What does that mean to you? You can't beat somebody with nobody.
Well, there are people who will, whether you're hiring people in an organization or talking about candidates for public office or election office or appointive office, and you want to advance the set of principles that you have, and you don't like the name that's being put forward, just saying that you don't like the name that's being put forward is in all likelihood not going to produce the result you want. And you're much better off if you can suggest somebody who will be more appealing to the folks who are doing the hiring or the decisions as to who they're going to support.
30 is better a snake in the grass than a viper at your bosom. That's sort of
well, you know, there's a contrary maxim that says keep your friends close and your enemies even closer. I don't buy that. There are contradictory maxims. He who hesitates is lost, and look before you leap. I mean, those are
right.
contradictory concept.
Bulls rush in, but the early bird gets the worm kind of things.
Yeah,
but you say if someone is a bad person, I don't want them on my inner circle. Leave them where they are. I think that's right.
That's right.
Here's one you mentioned earlier. Don't fully trust anyone until he is stuck with a good cause, which he saw was losing. It's a good judge of character.
That's a test of character.
32, a prompt, generous letter of thanks can seal a commitment which otherwise might disappear when the going gets rough. For me, I've had this happen where maybe someone makes a promise to do something for me, maybe over a couple of drinks, let's say, and I will email them the next day. Great seeing you last night. Thank you for agreeing to send that, Is that what you had in mind?
That's what I had in mind. If people realize that they have in fact given their word to you, then they're much more inclined to do what they said that they were going to do.
Yep.
And
otherwise, they might sort of
generous note of thanks, and it doesn't have to be handwritten and sent through the mails. These days, you can email a nice thank you note to somebody.
Absolutely. 33, we're making progress, Morton. 33, governing is campaigning by different means. What does that mean?
Well, it means that when you are in possession of government power, either by election or by appointment, you can't ignore the political implications of what you're doing, and you don't want to do things which are destructive of your political base. You want to bear in mind that it's a long ball game, and if you alienate everybody by insisting on things exactly your way, without regard to the political environment, you're going to hurt yourself and probably not achieve as much as you would have otherwise achieved.
All right. 34, you cannot make friends of your enemies by making enemies of your friends.
Yeah.
I see this happen a lot where people will they will maybe attack someone on their own side thinking that they're going to be respected by the other side, and that usually doesn't work out.
It doesn't work. I mean, if somebody is a rabid left-wing reporter, you are not going to help yourself by leaking news that will be of great interest to the reporter and damaging to one of your allies. You will not make a permanent friend of that reporter, and your friend will figure out, even if you've given the information off the record, they can figure it out. A long time ago, I stopped talking to reporters, print, broadcast, online, off the record. If I talk with the reporter, I let them know that whatever I say, you can quote, don't ask me for something off the record. Many years ago, I would do this occasionally, and then a story was written, and it was written in such a way that it didn't absolutely say my source is Morton Blackwell, but anybody who was knowledgeable about it could figure out who was the source of this. And so it was foolish for me to think that the reporter would absolutely protect my confidentiality. So it was surprising. I was 3 years on Ronald Reagan's White House staff, and reporters would frequently call me, and some of them were stunned that I would not talk to them off the record. And I think
that's a good. I think that's a good practice. to just go on the record. Yeah, I like it.
Want to be held accountable, don't say it.
Yeah. And you should assume that it couldn't, you know, I think I used to hear this at the Leadership Institute, assume anything that you say could be on the front page of the New York Times, like even if you think it's off the record. So 35, choose your enemies as carefully as you choose your friends. That makes sense. 36 is keep a secure home base. So don't get elected and then forget about the people. You got to dance with the one that brung you. Remember the people.
That's the idea. You can, particularly in volunteer politics, by keeping the faith with your allies, wind up having a lot of people who have an interest, and not just in the same principles as you do, but an interest in your success, seeing that as contributing to their own success.
Now, this next one, Morton, 37, sounds obvious, but I believe that it is so profound and that this changed my life. And it's, don't rely on being given anything you don't ask for.
Yeah.
Talk about that. Why is that?
Well, people think that their just desserts will come to them because they are their just desserts. When I was on the Reagan White House staff, lots of conservatives would come to see me. I had already been running training schools for a long time, and so there were thousands of people that had heard my lectures of one sort or another. And there was a young man whom I remembered vaguely, who in late 1981 called up. He was desperate to see me. And I said, certainly come in. And he came in, and this fellow had applied for a job in late 1980 and had received a form letter from the personnel office saying, thank you for applying, and we don't have anything right now, but we will keep you in mind, and we'll contact you perhaps in the future. This young man, obviously wasn't very bright, had moved to DC and taken a cheap apartment, and he had been waiting for like 9 months for the next communication from the Reagan personnel office. It was just appalling that he felt he was such a fine person and he had applied for employment, and he got this very nice letter which went out to probably thousands of people and assumed that there was going to be a job offer down the road, and now he was poor, he'd spent all of his money, and he was desperate for a job.
He was following another maxim that says, leap and the net will appear. But it didn't, but there was no net.
That's not my maxim. I've never leapt in the assumption there will be a net there. I tend to look down to check, see if it's really there.
Leap and the net will appear. I don't know where that comes from. It's not a Morton Blackwell maxim, and I think in this case, I think you may disagree with it, but I do think that it's really important. If you're single and you want to date a girl, you have to ask. If you're running for office and you want to raise money, you have to ask. And this is actually like a biblical, they do not have because they do not ask.
Ask and shall be given unto you. That is biblical.
Yes, but I have to tell you, it's not just a feeling of the pressure or the resistance to asking it's not just due to people feeling entitled. It's also due to our upbringing. Like some of us were told that you shouldn't, don't be pushy. It's being pushy to ask for things, or it's impolite. Or there's also a stubbornness, I'm not going to ask for anything that I can't get on my own. So there are, and then some of us are shy or introverts and asking for us. So there's a lot of reasons, I think, not just in feeling entitled, why people don't do this, but it's such a key. And Morton, you probably know this story. There's a story from Tip O'Neill where he was running for office for the first time, and there was a lady that lived next door to him, and she said, right election day, she said, "Tip, I'm going to vote for you, even though you didn't ask." And he said, "Well, I don't understand. I shovel your driveway every winter and I mow your lawn every summer. I didn't think I had to ask." And she said, "Tip, people like to be asked."
Yeah, that is true. But you can understand that people need an encouragement sometimes to ask. There's a reluctance to do that. Richard Figure, the great conservative direct mail fundraiser, got into direct mail because he was in charge of raising funds for the early young Americans for freedom. And he hated to go ask somebody for money. It just, and when people would say no, he was just crushed. And he said, if I write people letters and ask for money, I will never face the disappointment of somebody saying no. And I appreciate that. Last year, I turned 80 years old. And Matt, in my entire life, although I've been employed in various places, I have never asked for a raise. Never, ever have I asked for a raise. I got a lot of raises, so it's possible to proceed and do well.
Yeah.
With an employer. I mean, a smart employer knows that a very competent and valuable employer may be given other opportunities elsewhere for employment and wants to make the employees comfortable where they are.
Here's another really good one that's so important. 38. In politics, nothing moves unless it's pushed. There's some quote from FDR, I think, where he says, like, nothing happens in politics by accident. If something happens, somebody was making. But this is true in life. It's not just in politics. You got to hustle. You got to push. Nothing is going to be handed to you. Am I on the right track, or were you?
Absolutely. I mean, but there is an Aristotelian mean about this. You can, if you don't push at all, don't expect anything good to happen. If you make a bloody nuisance of yourself by pushing people, that will repel people.
Yeah.
So you have to use good judgment, and good judgment is something that the ability to judge well isn't given to everybody.
Yeah. Well, part of wisdom is knowing which maxims or laws to apply at a given time, or to what degree to apply them.
Look before you leap, and he who hesitates is lost. Completely contradictory.
Right.
And whichever one you want, depending upon the circumstances.
I think this one's 39 is pretty obvious. Winners aren't perfect. They just made fewer mistakes than their rivals.
Yeah, nobody's perfect.
40, one big reason is better than many little reasons.
Yeah.
Why is it? I'm not sure about that one. Why is that?
Well,
I mean, I guess if it's like your wife is cheating on you versus she didn't make a good dinner and she left the house messy, I mean, like one of those.
about my wife or your wife.
Oh, neither. Let me go on the record and say clearly, neither.
Well, if you are justifying to your board why you hired somebody, trying to explain all the little reasons, one big reason might be sufficient. I think this is the person in the country who, all things considered, is going to be the most effective. I overheard this maxim on the shuttle once from DC to New York. And there were two people, one of whom was familiar, but I couldn't identify who he was. The other one was the leftist, this is 20 years ago, was the super Democrat Joseph Rao. Remember Joseph Rao? Was a big leader in the Democratic Party and headed big operations. And he had clerked for a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And there weren't many people on this shuttle, and there were 3 seats in a row, and the 2 of them were in the row ahead of me, and I was trying to nap on the 3 seats in back, and I couldn't help but overhear what they were saying. And I heard Joseph Rao say one big reason is that, quoting his boss, the Supreme Court justice, that one big reason is better than little reasons. And
careful what you say on those shuttles. People are constantly overhearing things on.
that is true. That is what they say about the Capitol building. Even the urinals have ears.
Mm-hmm. I thought about you the other day, Morton, and I'm surprised it's not on the list. So there's a maxim: under promise and overachieve. And I thought about it when Donald Trump's campaign manager was talking about 1 million people wanting to get tickets to come to a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But it's not on the list, is it?
Yeah, it's if you underpromise and overachieve, people are going to think very highly of you. Now, what happened in the Tulsa event was, I've heard, a dirty trick done by the left. They organized left-wing networks to reserve tickets, huge numbers of tickets, and the Trump campaign people believed that meant that they would have hundreds of thousands of people trying to get in, but it wasn't the case. But it was certainly a mistake for them to say 1 million people want to get in and then have 6,200 people. I mean, that's not the worst mistake that any candidate has ever made, because the president gave a strong talk, and there were tens of millions of people who were watching it on television, and so
that's true.
He had the major thrust of what he wanted, but it clearly was a mistake. It undermines people's confidence in you.
By the way, I read a really good book. I still have it. Lou Barnett recommended a book called The Advanced Man. Buddy, you can have a popsicle. That's Beckett. Not your namesake. That's little Beckett wants a popsicle. I said, oh, go for it. Maybe your mom will, maybe mom will disagree. So it was a book called The Advanced Man by Jerry Bruno, who was Jack Kennedy's advanced man. And he, it seems to me, must have invented this concept of building a crowd and partitioning off rooms so it looked like a crowd if it wasn't. And they had also, it was very, and also downplay, never hype, always downplay how many people are going to show up. And I mean, this book was written 60 years ago, but some political operatives today need to go back and revisit some of those roles. We're almost done, Morton. This one's so true. 41. In moments of crisis, the initiative passes to those who are best prepared. I think this one's, I've just observed this. For example, like when 9/11 happened, I think that people in the administration who had a plan or an agenda and were ready were able to take power. And I also think that from what I do, like political commentators who were fluent in talking about it, like someone like Newt Gingrich was instantly able to start talking about radical Islam. Whereas a lot of commentators might have had to sort of bone up on it. They weren't prepared. And so, but is that what you were thinking, or is there any other stories to this one?
Well, it's just obvious, particularly for somebody like me who is in the business of preparing people. So that is a slogan which markets what I'm doing. So if you want to be able to achieve important things in moments of crisis, then it's important that you study how to win.
Yeah.
Some is understanding dynamics, but you need to build up a body of knowledge so that you understand history and geography and human nature.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 42, politics is of the heart as well of the mind, as well as of the mind. Many people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think that's so true.
That's not original to me, but it is extraordinarily important. People, the Spanish have the term simpatico, which doesn't translate particularly well, but simpatico means that you are a person with whom it's easy to have a friendly and cordial relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And
Ben Shapiro has a saying, the facts don't care about your feelings. And he's technically right, but I think it's at odds a little bit with this one, because the facts may not care about your feelings, but the public does care about their feelings. So that's just my tip for Ben Shapiro. He doesn't need tips from me.
Ben is such a spectacular communicator. He talks so rapidly, though, that if you're going to get to discuss a particular point with him, he's going to be 2 pages down the text.
I know.
Before you finish commenting on an earlier point, he's really very good. Last year, I made a trip out to California. I never met him, and I never met Dennis Prager, either one. And I made a trip out there in which I made it my business to meet both of them in their offices, because I think they're both achieving very good things for conservative principles, and I wanted to know them and offer what I could to be of assistance to Leadership Institute. Has over 2,000 local campus student clubs of all sides, limited government, free enterprise, strong defense, traditional values, and I'm happy to share access to people who are as good as Prager and Shapiro are. Both of them I admire greatly.
43, promptly report your action to the one who requested it. That makes sense.
Well, let me.
Oh yeah, please.
My staff know that.
Yeah.
They think about this, and so when I give somebody an assignment, they understand that it's a round trip ticket. That when they've done it, they got to come back and let me know.
Yes. Otherwise, you could ask for something, hundreds of things, and like no one ever gets around to like getting back to you on it. It's just 44. We got 2 more to go, and one of them I think the last one probably doesn't need much comment, but this one I want to get your take on, or your commentary on. 44. Moral outrage is the most powerful motivating force in politics. That is a strong declarative statement. The most. Well, why is that?
I think it's human nature. Human nature. Moral indignation can motivate people to do things which ordinarily they would never have done. Moral indignation is highly contagious. If one person is morally indignant, other people who are in the same room or who are watching through some kind of medium are also going to be worked up in moral indignation. Moral indignation has good effects and it has bad effects. It's the fear of other people being morally indignant that prevents many people from doing rotten things that they never would ever else would have done. So to that extent, moral indignation is desirable. On the other hand, what is a lynching? Lynching, people get moral indignation against somebody who may or may not be guilty of doing something, and they get worked up morally indignation, the mob routine, and they can kill somebody. And in that case, moral indignation leads people into doing the wrong thing. But fear of becoming the object of moral indignation has a civilizing effect on all of us. It's an extremely powerful emotion, and it is seldom engaged, as I point out, but it tends to sweep everything else forward. It can consume a person who is filled with moral indignation.
Where does that fit in with like the modern political correctness and cancel culture? Is that an element of this?
Well, people who are behind the political correctness movement try to gain power over people by being the person who sets the standard as to what is acceptable. And so there are people now who, with great moral indignation, are trying to tear down statues all over the country. And they've torn down a statue of Benjamin Franklin. They've torn down a statue of George Washington. They've torn down numbers of statues of Thomas Jefferson. And last night, a group tried to tear down the equestrian statue of General Andrew Jackson from Lafayette Park across from the White House. They are trying to set standards, and they're the arbiters, and people will be afraid of them because they may soon become, if they don't do what the political correctness says, they may soon be the object of moral indignation by people, which in a very unfair way.
So they're tapping in. So this is something to be worried about, I would assume, because they're tapping into what you think is the most powerful motivating force. And so this is something to be concerned about.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what Hitler did in the 30s, stirred up moral indignation. That's certainly what Lenin did in the Russian Revolution. Certainly what the French revolutionaries did. And they got to the point where all it took in the French Revolution was somebody to denounce you, and then to the guillotine.
Wow. So I'm glad we had this talk, because my whole life, well, for the last several years since I've been reading these laws, when I read moral outrage is the most powerful motivating force in politics, I always saw it solely from a positive standpoint, meaning we conservatives we're outraged by the corruption or the abuse or the lawlessness. And so I never thought of it from the other standpoint about how moral outrage can be a negative thing. So it's philosophically neutral, like everything else, like all the other political technology.
Terror is not philosophically neutral. Torture is not philosophically neutral. But most communications and interactions with people are.
The last one is pray as if it all depends on God, work as if it all depends on you. I think this is, I think about this all the time, because on one hand, if you're a Christian and you believe like, well, God, it'll all work out. God's totally in control. Well, you wouldn't do any work, right? Why would you do any work? But on the other hand, if you believe that it all has to be done by you, then you will probably die of a heart attack, at the age of 20. So these two things, I think.
I tested this maxim out. When I had 32 maxims, it was number 32. When I added it, got 45. It still is the last one. One of the most interesting things that I did when I was on Reagan's White House staff is that I organized the first meeting in the history of the United States that had the leaders of almost every major religious organization. I set a standard, got the records, any denomination that had 500,000 or more, we invited the head of their denomination there. I had a couple of Catholic cardinals. I had some of the major evangelical leaders like Jerry Falwell and Dr. Bill Bright and others. But we had the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church and the chairman of the Southern Baptist and so forth. And we had room in the East, in the state dining room at the White House for 125 of these leaders. And I told the folks there I was going to get them all together, even though many of these leaders really don't like each other. They're an interdenominational war. And I had a successful meeting. The president spoke at a luncheon. We had programs in the morning and the afternoon. And the way it worked was that the theme of the meeting was, I asked each of them to, before the day or two before they arrived, to send us a packet describing the charitable activities of their organization. And every religious organization does some charitable things. And so it was a sharing of ideas of the eleemosynary activities of all these organizations, and people saw that it probably would work, and it did work, and it was great. And there's never been a repeat of that either. That was in the early 1980s. But when I had them there, I went and read this maxim to the two Catholic cardinals who were there, the leaders of the Jewish organizations that were there, the Protestants. We had a major figure in the Mormon church there. And I had the whole day and walked around, and I just showed them this and asked them if they thought that this maxim was theologically sound. And Matt, every single one of them said yes. Every single one of them. I think
it is. I think this is one that isn't just sort of true and good to make you good at politics, but it make you a good person and keep you grounded and keep you from going crazy. So that is great. Well, thank you, Morton, for taking the time. For those watching on video, I'm holding it up. It's The Laws of the Public Policy Process. I think you can see this at leadershipinstitute.org, like under resources, I believe.
It is indeed, and there on the Leadership Institute website, we also have the 16 translated versions into
Cool.
other languages. And one of them, I had a friend of mine who was a PhD in the classics, and he translated it for me into classical Latin, but it's in Greek and Romanian and Japanese, and you name it. I've got
That is
got
cool. Well, Morton, I think you now have the distinction of being, I think this is our record-breaking show. We got through all 45, but I think this is now the longest podcast episode I've ever done. But it's been fascinating, and we covered a lot of ground, but we did it. Thank you.
But just remember, the mind can absorb no more than the seat can endure.
Yes.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Morton. Bye-bye.